Hello, everyone. My name is David. Welcome to today's webinar, The Winning Strategy to Get a 700 Plus on the GMAT. I will be your host tonight. I would like to welcome and thank you for joining us here today. Before we get started, I would just like to make sure that everyone can hear me properly. So please go ahead and type into the chat box, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. Yes, David, we can hear you. So then I know that everything's set up okay. Perfect. Cool. So I'm going to wait 2 to 3 minutes before starting so that all the latecomers, hopefully there won't be too many, but if there are, we'll have a chance to join in. In the meantime, I'd be really curious to hear where y'all are from and specifically where you are on your GMAT process. So have you started studying? Are you a retaker? What is your target score? How long do you have to study? The more information you can give me, the more I can tailor this specific webinar to fit you. So don't be shy, say hi to everyone, and please introduce yourself and tell me where you are on your GMAT journey. All right, so we have first timers here, aiming for 700 plus. We have people all the way from Cambodia. No, it's pretty late over there now. Kudos on joining in. We have people who are taking the test in 1 week. Okay, so tips for the last week. We have people who have not yet started their preparation. We have retakers with 2 weeks to go. So we really have a very broad swath of people here from all sides of the GMAT journey. And quite a lot of first timers. Quite a lot of first timers around. All right, so for those of you who are first timers, how about if you could go ahead and type in what is the most worrying thing about the GMAT for you? Sort of what's your biggest issue for the first timers? Quant and time, English, harder critical reasoning, ooh, making silly mistakes, quant and verbal. Okay. Great. Very nice. A lot of people saying time management. Time management is a very big issue on the GMAT. We're going to talk about this a little bit today, sort of in an indirect manner. This isn't pure time management webinar. Okay, that's excellent. That's a lot of info. And please do take the time to also read chat as you're listening to the webinar, see what your friends are saying and thinking. Again, I do try to make these webinars as interactive as possible. So go ahead and feel free to ask questions during the webinar. And every once in a while, I'll pause and I'll read your comments and I'll do my best to answer them. So let's get started. So again, welcome everyone. This webinar is titled The Winning Strategy to Get a 700 Plus on the GMAT. My name is David. I'm a senior tutor here at examPAL. Been in the test prep business for quite a few years now. This is me. And just before we get started, I'm just going to flash this on screen for a few seconds. We do have a special offer for any of you who are joining the webinar today, 20% off on any of our GMAT courses. So you can just go ahead, create a free account, and check us out and see if you want that 20% discount or not. So unfortunately, for many people studying for the GMAT, this is what it feels like. And quite a lot of you are saying quant, quite a lot of you are saying timing, quite a lot were saying making silly mistakes. Sometimes it feels like you're just banging your head up against the wall of a bunch of things to remember and a bunch of equations and so on and so forth. And if this is how the GMAT feels to you, then first of all, know that you're not alone. But secondly, know that you're possibly addressing the GMAT in the wrong way. And we at examPAL, as I said, we are essentially a company founded by teachers. What we found over years of teaching is that people often think of the GMAT in the wrong way. And the first part of this webinar is going to try to share with you our experience in how you should view the GMAT, how you should approach the GMAT in general from a strategic point of view. All right. And so what are the big problems? What is the pain in taking the GMAT? There are, of course, many pains, but these are the main pains. Pain number one, and especially speaking as a teacher, I can tell you that there are many, many different ways to solve any given question. And so we'll see a few examples of this later on. But especially if you're reading, for example, from a book, and you see several different approaches to solve a question, then you need to ask yourself, which of these ways works best for you? And this is where books and, for example, the official guide especially often fails, because it only gives you a very, very specific, narrow view of the GMAT questions. And this often isn't good enough for many, many people because they can't do the calculations quickly enough, because they don't understand what exactly a more clear phrasing or unambiguous phrasing means, in sense correction, for example, or for various other reasons. So this is one very big difficulty in the GMAT in general. A second difficulty is time, as many, many people had said. So I can guarantee you that if you had, say, 5 to 10 minutes per question, you could solve every single one of the questions on the GMAT and get that perfect 800, not even 700. Unfortunately, you don't have this time. You only have approximately 2 minutes per question, a little bit less than that, a little like 2 minutes in quant, a little bit less than that in verbal. And you need not only to figure out how to solve the questions, but you also need to figure out how to do that quickly. This ties into what we talked about before. So if your approach to the GMAT, or if the way you're thinking about the GMAT is a little bit like this guy here, who's just trying to stick everything into his head, learn all the formulas, learn how to put everything into equations, and so on and so forth, you're probably doing it wrong, because you just won't be able to do it quickly enough in order to study for the GMAT. So what should you do? All right, and we'll get into that later on. And the third big issue with the way people often study for the GMAT is that they're doing it in a very, very inefficient manner. So in the GMAT especially, many of you are already professionals. You've been working in various businesses for the past, sometimes even for the past decade. You're executives, you have a family, you have a 9-to-5 job. You just don't have the time to be wasting, okay? And as such, what you need to do is you really need to focus in your studies as you're studying, not just by practicing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of questions, but really learning as you practice. And that is going to be the heart of this webinar. What should you learn? What should you focus on when studying for the GMAT in order to get a 700, okay? That's sort of the main big idea of this webinar. And sort of at examPAL, that's what we do. Sort of we do all the heavy lifting for you, in the sense that we study how our students think. We study the effectiveness of all the methods, and we find the fastest way to solve each question. And all of this channels into something called cognitive flexibility. And I'm not going to talk about this now. I just want to flash it here so it's in your mind. And I want to go straight into an example question. For the person asking if the sound is working, that I tested earlier, and pretty much everyone said that they could hear properly. Let me type that into chat for a moment. So if someone could please help the person in chat and tell them that the audio is working, then I would be grateful. Okay, so what's on the screen right now is a question. It's not a terribly difficult question. What I would like for you to do is to look at the question and to try to figure out what the answer is. And I don't want you to actually type in the answer to chat, though you're welcome to do that. I want to what I want you to do is to type into chat how you think you should go about solving this question. All right. So what is the solution to this question and how you should go about solving it? So take a minute or two to think about the question. I'm going to put on a stopwatch. This won't take too long. And again, type into chat the answer to the question and how you arrived at that answer. And if you're just sitting on the sideline, if you're on your phone and you can't use chat or whatever, then go ahead and read what other people are saying in the chat, right? And what we're going to see in a moment, most likely, is that different people are going to suggest different ways to solve this question, all right? And that's going to be the topic of this first question. All right, so go ahead, please. Type in the chat how you should go about solving the question. And if you like, you can also type in what you think the answer is. All right, so we have a few answers already. We have people saying plugging in numbers, trial and error, solving for X and then solving for Y. Any other ideas? All right, not a terribly difficult question. Shouldn't take you more than a minute to a minute and a half in real time. But right now, what we're doing is brainstorming. We're looking at this question and we're pausing. We're asking ourselves, how could I approach this question? Any more ideas before I show a few solutions? All right, so let's look at a few different ways to solve this question. All right, so method number one, what sort of you often see in a school environment is something like what's on the board right now. This is a very, very formalistic type of approach. You take the numerator, you break it up into x plus 2, x plus 2y. Then you split this into two fractions. And you see that the expression on the left is a fraction. It's a number smaller than 1. And the expression on the right is exactly 2, right? 2x plus 2y divided by x plus y, that's 2. And so therefore the answer is 2 plus a fraction. That means it's between 2 and 3. Now, I'll note that in this specific webinar, no one actually mentioned the specific method, and that's not by accident. There are a rare few who find this type of mathematical, very, very rigorous approach natural. For the majority of us, especially those of us who finished college a very, very long time ago, this seems very arcane. But unfortunately, this is what you find in many textbooks because this is sort of the rigorous proof for the question. So a more natural way to solve this question for many of us is what we like to call the alternative approach. And for example, we can just pick numbers. So people suggested trying 0 and 1, trying 1 and 2. And there's many, many ways to do it. It doesn't really matter. Specifically here, the example I show is I'm picking x equals y equals 1. Then you just plug that in. And so you get to the answer 3 plus 2 divided by 2 equals 2.5. And once again, you're at answer choice D. And what I'd like to note about this specific answer method is that we haven't formally proved anything. All we've done is we've eliminated 4 out of the 5 options, right? Because our 5 options are between 0 and 1, 1 to 1.5, 1.5 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And because we found one pair of numbers that can't work with A, it can't work with B, it can't work with C, and it can't work with E, that means that the only possible answer remaining is D. All right, and these types of approaches are, we call them alternative or non-standard approaches. Are ways to get to the right answer without actually answering why that answer is correct. All right, you can, of course. So for the person asking, if you were allowed to use a positive x, a 0 or a negative, then you could use that. In this specific case, choosing one of the variables is 0 and the other isn't is fine. Let's look at a third way to solve this specific question. All right, and another way to solve this question is sort of logical. And what characterizes what we like to call logical approaches are sort of very, very bird's eye view takes on the question. So we're not going to go into rigorous calculations, and we're not going to sort of guess and pick numbers and hope that we can eliminate all of the answers. Instead, we're going to look at the question. We're going to say, well, okay, the numerator, it's a little bit more than twice the denominator, right? The denominator is x plus y. Twice that is 2x plus 2y. So the numerator is a bit more than twice that. It's a bit less than 3 times that, right? Because 3 times the denominator is 3x plus 3y. And therefore, the answer is between 2 and 3. And so what we did here in this specific solution approach isn't to sort of rigorously do all sorts of mathy things like the top approach you're looking at right now. It isn't to just guess numbers and hope what happens. It's to take a step back. It's to zoom out and to see if we can figure something out. All right, and these 3 approaches are the core of what we call the PALgorithm and how we think things should be taught. And so just to summarize this for a moment, we call this the PALgorithm. And what does the PALgorithm stand for? The PALgorithm stands for 3 different ways to approach any specific GMAT question. The precise method is when we arrive at an answer using high school-like methods, such as equation manipulation, what you saw above. This is what you often find in the textbook. It's the formal approach. The alternative method uses specific tools that get us to the right answer without telling us why this answer is correct. So examples are, for example, in critical reasoning or in reading comprehension, if you recognize that 4 of the answer choices are out of scope, completely out of scope. This, for example, is very easy to do in must or could be true questions in critical reasoning. Then you know that the 5th answer is true. If, for example, you're asked about the maximum or the minimum, the edge of the range, and you can eliminate various sides of the range, then you can get to that answer. Okay, and the logical approach uses things like basic properties or symmetries. It zooms out. So again, if we're going to use a verbal example for a moment, then in critical reasoning, it would be understanding sort of the logic of the argument, and not necessarily looking at every single one of the answer choices, which people often do. And for those of you who said you have a timing problem, then this is a very, very important thing to realize about critical reasoning, and we're going to talk about later on. You should not read all of the answers in critical reasoning. Instead, you should try to zoom out and see the big picture. Okay, so just to sum up this part, when studying for the GMAT, what you should do is you should focus in on what we like to call the cognitive flexibility. And I'm going to flash that slide up here again. So this slide. And what is this cognitive flexibility? It is these three methodologies, or these three broad categories for how to approach a question. Are you going to follow the rules one step at a time to get to the answer? Are you going to try to hack the question? Or are you going to try to zoom out and look at the big picture? Okay, so that is more or less the big picture of how to study for the GMAT. And if we want a few specific details, and I'll just briefly go over these, then specifically, we make sure to keep things as engaging as possible. That's very, very important. It's very, very important to do feedback. So not only to study the material and study the different methods, but to feedback what you're doing as you're going to do it. And I'm going to come back to this point later on. That's it. More or less, that's it. So just a few more slides about examPAL specifically. So we are an awarded test prep, and we have excellent ratings, and there is a guarantee for those of you who want to join with us. You can check all this out on the FAQ. And what we're going to do now in the next part of the webinar, all right, the first part of the webinar is just this big picture of how should you approach the GMAT. We're now going to go into a few questions, and we're going to show specifically how different methods can have a very, very strong effect on things like timing, which people were saying is a big problem for them, on things like making silly mistakes, which people were saying is a problem for them. All these really, really practical things that are important for you to know when you go and study for the GMAT. So question number one, take a minute to read this question. This is sort of a medium plus level question, maybe in the 600, 650 or so. And you don't have to actually solve it. I'm going to show a few solutions to this in a minute. It's harder than the question we looked at before, but I would like for you to read this and to try to think, how would you go about solving this question? Would you try to put it into equations and follow those steps one step at a time until you get to the answer? Would you try to somehow hack the question, maybe by using the answer choices in order to figure out which four of the answers are wrong so you can pick the fifth one? Or would you maybe try to zoom out and look for some sort of fundamental symmetry or fundamental logical principle hiding behind it? All right, these are, again, the precise, the alternative, and the logical approaches to solving a GMAT question. So, ideas for solving this question. Feel free to type them into chat. Any ideas? I'm not looking for a full solution at the moment. I'm looking for your snap judgment, okay? People were saying that they were aiming for 700. A really, really big, important, big part of getting to that, really, really desired 700 score is the ability to make a snap judgment. Is the ability to look at a question and say, okay, the concept behind this question is so-and-so. One way I can go and solve it is to do A. Another way I could solve this question is to do B. A third way is to do C. Based on my experience with myself, B is going to take me a really long time, so I'm not going to do it, but I am going to go through, I don't know, equations or something like that. All right. Snap judgments is what you need to develop in order to get a high score on the GMAT. And that is what I'm looking for right now. All right. So we're seeing a few suggestions for a zoom out and logical. And we have something that looks to be an outline of a correct answer. All right. Only one person? Any more ideas how you would go about solving this question? So we have people starting to calculate percents. We have people working with ratios. And again, take the time to read chat, right? See what all your colleagues are thinking, how they are approaching the question. This just goes to show how many different ways to approach the GMAT there are. Some people are saying count. We have people disagreeing about the correct answer for the moment. We have people estimating, saying to take it up to 1,000, so it's an easier calculation, and then take it from there. All right, so many different ways to approach this question. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show two specific methods. The first is going to be sort of what we like to call the precise approach, the high school approach. So what many people usually do when shown a question like this for the first time is to say, well, okay, I know what to do. I need to figure out how many women there are, and then I need to divide the number of women by the number of guests, and then I get the percentage, right? That's sort of the definition of percentage. So let's start by just calculating it. So we need to first figure out what 36% of 900 is. That is 36 divided by 100 times 900. You can cancel it out to get 36 times 9. You have to do a little bit of math here, unfortunately, to get to the answer, which is 324 women at the wedding. Okay, so initially at the wedding, there were 324 women. Now, we know that 450 men left the wedding. That means that there are a total of 450 guests remaining. And that means that the woman would be what percentage of the remaining guests? There would be 324 divided by 450. And unfortunately, this is where the calculation intensive method doesn't quite break down, but it gets really annoying. So you now have to estimate what this number is. And you can either just straight up estimate. Someone was saying, for example, earlier, take it to 1,000. So you can say, well, this is almost like 640 divided by 900. So it's going to be a little bit more than 65%. So it must be answer choice D. That's great. You can do an estimation like that. Or you can actually try to rigorously calculate it, which again is what you will see in any textbook solution to this question. So anyways, you'd first need to figure out how to factorize the numbers, then cancel things out, do a little bit more factorization and multiplication, expanding the ratios. Eventually you get to 72%. Which is answer choice D. And here I'd like to pause for a moment. And I'd really like to emphasize that every single question that you see on the GMAT is solvable. Okay, you're not going to see research questions or big open-ended questions. You definitely know there exists a solution, and you definitely know that it's one of the 5 options in front of you. So what this means is that just following the rules carefully, step by step, will always get you there if you do things correctly, if you don't make any mistakes on the way. So if you're looking at a question and it looks really big and confusing, then one thing you can do to help approach it is to try to break it down step by step. Make sure you do each and every single one of the steps properly, and you are guaranteed to get there. You might not be guaranteed to get there in 2 minutes. That sort of depends on how good you are with doing the math. And this is the heart of the precise approach. It's saying, okay, I know there's a solution. I'm just going to break things down step by step. It doesn't look too complicated, and I'm going to get there. Unfortunately, all these calculations, especially the bottom line, aren't terribly fun. And what we would like is to find something faster. And this something has already been explained in chat, and I'm just going to explain it again. So a different solution here, which is sort of a zoom out approach, is to sort of take a step back and say, well, okay, we need the percentage of the women out of the remaining guests. So the percentage is the part out of the whole. So really what we want to find out, is the percentage initially is the woman divided by all the guests. What we want to find out is how many women are there out of the remaining guests. Now, 450 men is half of the guests. And since only men left, then we have the same number of women. So what does that mean? We have the same number of women, the same numerator divided by a denominator which is only half the size. That means that we're going to get twice the percentage. All right, so if we were able to notice this, if we were able to sort of zoom out on the structure of the question and figure out that actually all that we have is a doubling of the ratio, then we can immediately select answer choice D, and we would get at the right endpoint much faster than what would have happened had we tried to go step by step. And this is actually a real question on our website. And just comparing students who used sort of a rigorous step-by-step approach versus students who tried to zoom out, then on average, we can see that people who did the precise approach really did take over 2 minutes. They took about 2.5 minutes to answer the question. And again, this is an average over lots of students. And people who used a more logical zoom out type of approach took less than 2 minutes. They only took 110 seconds to solve this question. All right, to tie back into the main theme of this webinar, when preparing for the GMAT, what you want to do is not to bang your head against the wall like the guy we saw at the start of the webinar. What you want to do is, yes, learn the basics, learn the basic rules, learn how to put things into equation. But once you have those basics down, you really want to take a meta step back and ask yourself, what different ways can I use to solve this question? What are the tools in my toolbox? How cognitively flexible am I? And again, as we'll get into a bit later on, you want to tie all of this into your own debugging process. Sort of what types of mistakes am I making? How can I fix them? And so on and so forth. And we'll get to this at the end of the webinar. Cool. So let's look at another question. This one is also a quant question. And all right, so we're going to try the same deal as before. Please take a minute to look at the question. What I'd like for you to do is to post into chat what you think the best way to solve this question is. Do you want to put it into equations? Go sort of step by step by step? Do you think there's some kind of zoom out thing that you can say? Do you think you should maybe hack the question in some manner so you can get to the right answer by eliminating everything that doesn't work? How do you think this question should be approached? So please type your suggested approach, and please type what you think the answer is into chat, and we'll proceed in a minute. All right, so there's one person saying logical. Calculate the second printer timing to the first printer. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but maybe you're saying to calibrate them together somehow. Any other ideas? Divide by the total, 230. All right, so take it down to maybe something like the minimal common denominator. Figure out what happens, what you need for one page, and then go from there. We have someone saying 80 in 15 minutes plus 150 in 15 minutes. How each one makes in 3 and in 2 minutes. So they picked the magic number of 3 and 2 for some reason. Okay. Test the answers. All right, so you see there are quite a few ways to go through this question. All right, and so what we're going to do now, we showed the precise and the logical approaches before. I'm not going to show the precise approach in this specific question. The precise approach, sort of the step by step by step, is to really take everything down to 1 minute. And this is what you're usually taught when you learn about rate and work questions, right? So 80 pages in 15 minutes is 80 divided by 15 pages per minute. 100 pages divided in 10 minutes is 10 pages per minute. And then so together they have something around 17 or so pages per minute. And then you sort of divide 230 by that, and you do all sorts of math with fractions and various non-fun numbers, and you get to an answer eventually. The approach that we're going to show right now is an alternative approach. And when are these approaches useful? They're useful when you're not exactly sure how to approach a question. You're looking at a question. You maybe know the general concept that the question is talking about. You maybe remember the rules, but you're really not sure how to apply them. And in this case, what you should do is you should ask yourself, you should basically ask the question for help. And how can you ask the question for help? You can look at the answers. You can say, well, I know that it's got to be one of these 5 numbers. So let's just try them out. And so, for example, let's say that the answer is A. Why is it A? Because 10 is a nice number. It's easy to calculate stuff in 10 minutes. So let's say we have 10 minutes total. Then printer 1 printed, we can actually calculate this specifically, right? It's 2/3 times 80, or we can guess where we're going to say, well, it's going to be somewhere around the 50 to 60 pages. The laser printer, printer 2, printed exactly 100 pages. So together in 10 minutes, the two of them are going to do somewhere around 160 pages. Well, that's certainly not going to be enough. All right, so we definitely know that it's not A. we need to figure out something which is an increase from 160 pages to 230 pages. So we need to increase it by a little bit, but not by too much. So D and E, which mean we're going to double our time or we're going to triple our time, they're probably right out. And C18, which is almost double the time, that's probably too much as well. All right. And so even after just testing A, testing 10 minutes, we haven't gotten to a right answer, but we're in a pretty good position to estimate and to say that, you know what, most likely the answer is going to be B. And this type of thing is what the alternative approach is all about. It's about how you can figure out which of the answers are flat out impossible without straight up doing all of the hard work to get there. Okay, and so let's just try. Let's try B. B is our big hunch. So say it took 15 minutes. Then printer 1 printed exactly 80 pages. Printer 2 printed, well, 1.5 times 100 pages. So that's 150 pages. Together, they printed exactly 230 pages. And voila, we're done. So the answer to this question is B. And let me just check for a moment. Yeah, we don't have the logical solution with us here today, but I would like to mention that a few of you mentioned common denominators before. And so essentially what we usually do when we say 80 divided by 15, 80 pages divided by 15 minutes is however many pages per minute, we're taking everything to a similar common denominator, right? We're taking everything to 1 minute denominator. We're saying how much would printer 1 do in 1 minute? How much would printer 2 do in 1 minute? The logical approach would say, well, you know what? There's no actual reason to figure out how much things are doing in 1 minute. Why not pick an easier number? Why not figure out how much the printers are doing in, say, 30 minutes, right? Because 30 minutes is just twice 80, so that's 160. And 30 minutes is 3 times printer 2, that's 300. So these are really, really easy numbers to calculate. And then you can just see that you get immediately to twice 230, and so you get to the same answer. And so a zoom out type of approach to this question, sort of one which really understands what's going on behind the scenes in rate and work questions, is saying, you know what, all I need is a common time frame. And I can pick whichever common time frame I like. I can pick 1 minute, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever is comfortable for calculation, that's what I'm going to use. And that's another key focus for the logical approach, right? So when looking at a question, you should ask yourself, what can I do to make the math as easy and as fast as possible? Not just jump straight into the calculations, but really, really get to the heart of what the question is actually asking me about. All right, cool. So that's 2 quant questions that we've shown today so far. The next question we're going to do is a verbal question. And so what I want to do now is pause for a few minutes and ask what your big problems in verbal are. For those of you who have started studying and who are on their way or who are retaking or whatever, what are your big problems in verbal? All right, sentence correction, reading slowly. Sentence correction is a bit unspecific, so if you could be a little bit more specific in your problems, I would be grateful. The more I study, the more answer choices come right. That is unfortunate in sentence correction. So that's, I don't have the sentence correction question to show here today, but I will talk for a little bit about it. All right, what other problems? 2 long paragraphs in reading correction, in reading comprehension, I'm assuming. The humanities, sentence correction. A lot of people are saying sentence correction is a big problem. What else? What are your problems in verbal before we look at one sample question? The need to follow my train of thought. Do you mean to follow the question's train of thought, so you have difficulty following the logic of the question? Quickly eliminating answer choices and sentence corrections, inference questions. And again, please take the time to read what all of your colleagues are writing into chat, because you'll probably encounter these problems yourself at some point along the way. So it's always nice to have someone to consult with. Not to read the whole paragraph, reading comprehension, hard to focus. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk in general about sentence correction and reading comprehension. The question that we have here today is about critical reasoning. And so I won't talk about that until after we go through the question. Okay, so sentence correction. So sentence correction is generally divided, or rather the stages of preparing for sentence correction are often divided into 2. All right, stage number 1 is learning the basic sort of grammatical rules. And this is unfortunately a huge pain, especially for those of you who are not native speakers in English, and sometimes even for those of us who are native speakers in English, but haven't learned sort of the proper English that the GMAT expects us to know. So you need to know things like subject-verb agreement, singular versus plural. You need to know pronouns. You need to know the touch rule for which. You need to know all these sorts of rules. But to be honest, there are far less rules than what you need to know. So you really don't need to know all of the technical names of everything. You don't need to know what gerunds are. You don't need to know what participles are. You only need to know a little bit what an independent versus dependent clause is. Really, you only need to learn the basics of the grammar rules. What is much, much more important in sentence correction, and this is often the second phase, which some people don't realize that they need to move to, is looking at the meaning. So many of the answers in sentence correction, the answer choices, the incorrect ones, are wrong not necessarily because something is grammatically wrong. There often are grammatical mistakes in every single one of the wrong answer choices. Don't sort of misinterpret me. But very often, a faster way to eliminate the wrong answers is just to see that they change the meaning of the sentence entirely. So for example, if a sentence is trying to compare between, I think there's this famous GMAT question where you're comparing between minority groups of one kind to groups of another kind. And one sentence talks about minority groups versus minority groups, and the other sentence, or versus other groups, and the other sentence talks about minority groups versus groups that prefer something or another. And all of a sudden, just by adding a word like that into the sentence, and there's a grammatical reason for why that is incorrect there. You've changed the meaning, right? You've changed, instead of comparing your original, say, apples to apples, you're now comparing apples to oranges. And this sort of thing is what the GMAT loves to do in sentence correction. All right, so my tip to you, for those of you who are struggling with sentence correction, especially for the person earlier who said that their big difficulty in sentence correction is that the more they learn, the less they know. My big tip to you is to look beyond the grammatical rules, to look to what the sentence is actually trying to say, and to see if the answer choice makes the sentence say that. All right, so that's a big tip for sentence correction. Again, we're not going to go into the details of sentence correction today. It's beyond our scope. Reading comprehension is a little bit tricky. Yes, the person who said that reading speed is a problem, that will give you a big that will be a setback in progressing in your reading comprehension abilities. And the tip for reading speed is honestly to just read. And when we talk about the actual schedule, sort of how to prep for the GMAT later on, then we'll discuss how do you improve your reading speed. But in reading, I think the most important thing to realize is that you don't need to know all the details on the first time through. When you're reading the paragraph for the first time, the passage rather, you should focus on the big connecting links and the overall tone of the passage. You should focus on sort of which details appear in which paragraph. But what you should focus on much more than that is the specific details in each one of the answer choices. So very often in reading comprehension, you're going to see answer choices that are half right and half wrong. So the first part of the question, for example, is correct, whatever that question is. But the second part adds some information that is out of the scope of the passage. And this eliminates the entire answer choice. Very often in reading comprehension, you'll see answer choices which are correct, but don't actually answer the question that was asked. So for example, you might be asked about the beliefs of, women in the suffrage movement. And the answer choice tells you about beliefs of men in the suffrage movement. And it could be a perfectly correct sentence according to the passage, but it doesn't actually answer the question. So really, when doing reading comprehension, once you've hopefully passed sort of the reading speed and sort of understanding what the passage is actually talking about, what you'll need to focus in on is the little tiny itty bitty details. And this is what makes reading comprehension so difficult. And my number one recommendation to you when practicing reading comprehension passages, and you should practice official ones as much as possible, is to look at every single one of the wrong answer choices and figure out why it's wrong. Once you get good at that, once you get good at looking at the wrong answer choices in reading comprehension, saying, oh, they added this detail here, they added that detail there, here they sort of misinterpreted something in the passage or misinterpreted the question. Once you get good at doing that, then you'll get good at doing that also for new questions that you don't have never seen before. And this is the best sort of way to practice reading comprehension. Okay, so next critical reasoning question. And what I want to say about critical reasoning is, you know what, first I'm going to sort of let you guys attack the question, see what you can do with it, and then I'm going to talk about it. So take a minute to read through the question, and please type in the chat what you think the right answer is, and also how you approach critical reasoning questions in general. So what did you do to solve this specific question? And I will note that this is actually an official GMAT question that we are permitted to use. So this is not one of our own questions like the questions you've seen before. This is an official question. All right, so I'm seeing a bunch of answers. I'm not going to say if that's the right answer or the wrong answer. What I am going to ask you to do is to explain your approach to critical reasoning. And again, and now we see the answers are starting to vary. Again, the purpose of this webinar is also for you to see what your friends are thinking and how they are approaching the questions. All right, so the more you participate, the more you will learn. All right, so we have a few people saying first I read what is required, or first think what has to be true and then hope to find it. Do we have any other suggestions for how to approach this specific question in general, or critical reasoning questions in general? Mm-hmm. Cool. Cool. So we're seeing a few very nice things in chat. All right, and I'll wait for the last person typing to finish typing, and then I'll proceed. Think of what the answer should be. So that's a bit similar to what we've seen before. All right, so I will wholeheartedly agree with what many of you have been saying in chat. The best way to approach a critical reasoning question in general is to first read the passage, to figure out what the logical parts of the passage are, what the links between each one of the sentences is, and then to try to infer the answer. All right, and the rationale behind this is that very, very often, the 5 answer choices that you're looking at are like 5 very, very talented and very, very intelligent salespeople who are also, unfortunately, not particularly friendly. Each one of them is trying their very, very best to convince you that they are the best answer. And if you just read every single one of the answers and you think about it and you wonder and so on and so forth, then not only will you get confused, but you'll also waste time. And as many of you know, time is a huge issue on the verbal portion. And so you really, really should avoid this as much as possible. Now, sometimes it isn't possible. Sometimes you do have to go to the answer choices. For example, if you need to support the answer choices, right? You need to see you're asked a question such as the passage best supports which of the following answer choices, then you have no choice but to just see which of the answer choices best fit. But very often, you can guess what the answer is going to be before looking at the answer. And that's what we're going to do in this specific question, right? And this is what we like to call the precise approach, because we're basically following step by step by step. What's the step by step by step here? It's take the passage, break it down into its logical parts, look at the links between each logical part, and infer what is necessary based on those links. So it's just following the logic step by step by step. Okay, so let's go through the passage. The interview is an essential part of a successful hiring program. Okay, so basically they're saying that the interview is essential because with it, job applicants who have personalities that are unsuited to the requirements of the job will be eliminated from consideration. So if we sort of boil this down into its important parts, then we know that the interview is essential. We have that really important linking word there because, and so why is the interview essential? It is essential because it helps us to eliminate unsuitable applicants. Okay, and so what is a necessary assumption behind this, right? The necessary assumption is that we can actually eliminate these applicants from the interview, which is to say that the interviewers can accurately identify applicants whose personalities are unsuited to the requirements of the job. And I just quoted answer choice C, but the logic behind it should be very clear, right? So if your interviews are essential, right? You want to eliminate all of the unsuitable applicants, and you must have an interview for this process. Then why must you have an interview? Because interviews are the way to eliminate the applicants. And therefore, you're assuming that the interviews can actually do this, that the interviewers can actually do this. And then you have a general idea of what to look for in this case. And when skimming through the answer choices, you can see that C is the only one that talks about this. C is the only one that sort of touches on the logical points of can the interview identify the applicant or not. And that is why C is almost certainly the answer. If you're not 100% sure of the logic because you don't feel you perfectly understand the passage, because C isn't exactly what you expect, and so on and so forth, then you can go and skim over the other options to see if they are accurate or not. And so, for example, if we look at D, then we say that the only purpose of an interview, the word only there is a really, really big red flag. So you're very rarely going to have the word only in a correct answer choice. So anyways, the only purpose of an interview is to evaluate whether the job applicant's personalities are suited to the requirements of the job. So the argument isn't assuming that. It just needs the interviews to do the job. It doesn't need for them to only do that and nothing else. And some of the other answer choices flip the logic and do other things. So for example, answer choice A, hiring program will be successful if it includes interviews. So that's not really missing the point. We're not talking about right? It's flipping the causality here between the two parts. Cool. So that is this question. Answer choice C, as we said before. I just want to sum up before going into the last 5 to 10 minutes of the talk, in which I will discuss a specific scheduling, right? So far we've talked about the big strategy. We've talked about how you should approach the GMAT, different ways to think, what you should do to save time, and various different types of questions, and in the quant section, verbal section, and so on and so forth. In the last section, I'm going to talk again for 5 to 10 minutes about the actual schedule. So how should you organize your time so as to finish the job in 2 months, which is what we recommend. Okay. Before doing that, I would like to talk a little bit about mastering rapid improvement. All right, so some of you started off on this webinar by saying that you're aiming for a score of 700. And to get a 700, it isn't enough to just learn the basic material or to just learn the different types of solution strategies. You also have to sort of break through your glass ceiling. And for many people, if there are any retakers among you, then you can ask them. You often reach a point where you've studied and studied and studied and studied, and you've gotten to a certain score level, say 630, maybe it's 660, maybe it's 550, maybe it's 700, and you need that extra 30 points, that extra 50 points, in some cases, that extra, say, 100 points. And so what do? How do you break through that glass ceiling? And the answer is that you really need to go back to basics. You need to view every single one of your mistakes as opportunities, and you really need to start being pedantic and very, very strict with yourself. Strict but optimistic. And so you need to research every single mistake that you make and ask yourself why you got that mistake wrong. And we like to divide mistakes into 3 categories. So professional mistakes are mistakes such as, I just didn't know that specific part of the material. So in the rate and work question that we saw above, you weren't familiar with the law connecting rate to work. In critical reasoning, you didn't actually know what an assumption was. You didn't know what a negation of an assumption is, and you didn't know why negation is important. All right, these types of mistakes, if you make a mistake like this, right, you're looking at a question, you answered incorrectly, and you look at the answer choice and you said, oh, I didn't know that the laws of exponents work that way, then that is a mistake that should send you back to the drawing board. It tells you you need to go and refresh your memory in that specific topic. A second type of mistake, a second category of mistake, is what we like to call technical mistakes or silly mistakes. And these are unfortunately the most annoying types of mistakes. These are mistakes such as I dropped a plus, I dropped a minus, I didn't read the question properly, I missed a piece of data, I only looked at positive numbers but forgot to look at negative numbers, all these sorts of things. Silly mistakes. They're mostly about focus. And they're mostly about taking the time to answer each question properly, and recognizing when you're in a difficult question and you should double check your work, or when you're in a question that you're in full control of, and therefore can sort of allow yourself to rush forward in it. And the third category of mistake is a strategic mistake. And this is, for example, trying to go step by step and getting lost in tons and tons of calculations when just picking one of the answer choices would have been a better idea. Or conversely, trying to pick numbers in questions with maybe inequalities and even 2 variables. And sometimes there are questions where it is very, very difficult to pick numbers in. And if you do try to pick numbers, then you'll end up sort of getting completely lost. And so when you make mistakes, pause and take a moment to really, really analyze what mistake you've made. And let me just skip up to a slide that I have here, which is really, really illustrates this well. So on our platform, after every single question, what we do is we help you to get this feedback. And this is one example of how to do it, but this is something that you should do even if you don't use our platform. So if you make a mistake, you can have a list, all right, make a list or go online or wherever you like and make a list of all the possible ways to get questions wrong. Like the general ideas, not specifically, I didn't know that I plugged in b equals 5 instead of b equals 6, but something like adjacent angles or something like that. All right, so have these categories of mistakes and then pick one. And then this is something that we do in the platform and help you to focus on. Conversely, if you get an answer, a question correct, then make sure to realize what you did right. So was this a question in which you correctly picked the number and used it? Was this a question in which you correctly wrote down the equations and used them? All right, whatever it is that works for you, this is something that you should become familiar with. This is something that you should learn to improve over time, because again, success on the GMAT is about building up your own cognitive flexibility and learning to use your own personal skills. Cool. So that's the big thing. And so let's move on to the final study plan. And then the last 5 minutes will be an open Q&A for whatever questions you may have. So first of all, we recommend only studying for a month and a half to 2 months. I know that many people like to study for more, for 3 to 4 months even. The only time that we recommend people to study for such a long period is either if you are a non-native English speaker, so you need a lot of boosting time for your English skills, and then you can just take the first month to only focus on verbal. Just practice reading and reading and reading and reading, practice the vocab, practice these basic things that can help you to deal with the GMAT, to boost up your reading speed, for example. Or alternative, if you're an extremely busy person. So if you're working 10-hour days, then you know what, maybe you just don't have the energy to fit a GMAT in there as well, especially if you have a family on top of that. Other than that, we don't recommend more than a month and a half to 2 months. And the reason is that you just forget what you did at the start. So if you've been studying for 2 to 3 months, then most likely you'll have a very vague grasp of whatever it is that you did at the start of your study period. And this is something that we want to avoid. So a month to a month and a half is sort of a good intensity period. Specifically, this is the scheduling that we suggest for our platform. And sort of with our platform, you just have to follow the course trail. We recommend dividing things into 2-day study schedules. So day 1, you learn the basics. Day 2, you practice and you apply and you build up your various rules and so on and so forth, the tips that you want for yourself, the different strategies, the cognitive flexibility, all that sort of thing. It's really, really important to maintain a reading schedule, especially for those of you who feel that you have time issues or who feel that you just can't comprehend the reading comprehension passages. Then you want to take a good source of writing and you want to read it. Just sit there, and when you're reading it, practice actively reading. So as you're reading, take the time to ask yourself, why is the author asking this question or that question? And so on and so forth. And this will really, really hone you in on the type of comprehension that you need for the GMAT. The last 10 days are devoted to reviews, and there's a really, really important point to be made here. Your practice CAT. So many people take the practice exam just as a sort of marker of what is their score. And this is not what you should be doing. All right. The CAT is not only to figure out what your score is. The purpose of the CAT is to help you. It's sort of like a general rehearsal for the exam itself. All right. So on exam day, you're going to walk in the center. You're going to go and put your stuff in the locker room. You're going to go through all of the various signings and administrative sign-ins that you need to do there. And then you're going to walk into the center. You're going to sit in front of the computer. You're going to click next on the screen, and then you're going to be stuck there for the next 3 hours or so, a little bit more. And what you want to do with a practice CAT is really, really simulate this. You want to find a chunk of time, a 3-hour chunk of time, if you're only doing, say, the quant and the verbal sections. You want to take only an 8-minute break in the middle. You want to put your phone in the drawer. You want to shut everything else out. And the reason that you want to do all this is that you want to test things like your stamina. You want to test your timing strategy. You want to test when you get tired. And you want to test which types of questions you tend to get mixed up on. Is it maybe harder towards the end or towards the middle or wherever it is? All these types of things are really, really important, and your only way to practice them is with the CAT. Besides that, you can, of course, use the CAT to focus in on topics you don't know you don't know well enough. So for example, if in the CAT you see that you are getting lots of probability questions wrong, then you can go back and you can focus on probability. If in the CAT you see that your biggest problem is actually sentence correction and maybe not reading comprehension as you expected, then you can focus in on that. And then you should take the time to really debug your exam, right? So your exam is a very, very important learning tool, and you should treat it as such. We've talked about keeping an error log and about making the same mistake reasons. Another thing to realize is that you really don't want to stress yourself out before the exam. So on exam day, you want to be as calm and as collected and as focused as possible. So the day before the exam, what you want to do is you want to take a day off. You want to rest, you want to energize if possible. So when you get to exam day, you're as focused and as energetic, mentally energetic as possible. And that's it. If you've done all that, if you've worked on your cognitive flexibility, if you know how to break through your glass ceiling, if you have the right plan, then you have a very good chance of maximizing your score. Unfortunately, I can't guarantee a 700, but I can guarantee, if I remember correctly, a 70-point improvement from whatever your last GMAT is. That is what we at examPAL guarantee. And again, if you join us, then for the next 48 hours, there's 20% off on any of the GMAT courses that we offer. So feel free to create a free account and log in. We are now opening up the Q&A section for the last 5 minutes of this webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and on whatever topics, something I've talked about, something I haven't, and I'll be here to answer your questions. And thank you very much for having been here today. So do you have any specific tips for retaking the exam? So question number one to that question is, how much do you need to improve your score by? The general answer is that you will either have to go back to basics. So if you're very, very far from where you want to be, then you really need to go and relearn the material and so on and so forth, because there's something fundamental that's missing. If you are relatively close, say within maybe 20 to 30 points, maybe 40 points of your score, then there is a chance that you can get away with only focusing on your weak points, focusing on your strategy, polishing your technique, that sort of thing. But it really depends on where you're at. So to answer your question, you should please send us just your details. Quant by 4 to 5 points, again, it depends where. It depends if you're at a 45 to 50 or at a 30 to 35. So send us your details in chat on our website, and we'll be happy to help you out. Do you only do online courses or also in person? We also have private tutoring classes as part of the package that we offer. Our course is a self-study sort of course, so we put all the information there. We teach you all the techniques. We help you work through your mistake reasons. There's an AI behind the scenes that helps pick questions for you specifically. And if you need additional help, then you can request private tutoring sessions in whatever you're weak at. But please go and check out just the packages that we offer on our website. We do have boot camps. Sign in, ask on our website for people to notify you, for when the next boot camp is, and then just go join it. Okay, so another question about boot camps. On the online course, is it self-paced with videos, or would there be live sessions with teachers? As I just mentioned, it's self-paced, not just with videos, by the way, but also with lots of quizzes and practice questions. And as I said, iterative feedback. So really the heart of the course, and I didn't emphasize this webinar, but sometimes we do, the heart of the course is this screen right here. So after every single question that you are asked, you have to select what the main tool that you used is and what the main reason that you made a mistake is. And this is for your own feedback, right? Especially if you're aiming for the high ends, the 700s of the GMAT score, you really, really need to be aware of what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. So the goal of this is not only to help the AI sort of adjust the program to your specific needs, it's also to help you focus in on what you're good at and what you're bad at. Any more questions? All right, we have time for 2 to 3 more questions if anyone is interested. Should learning the fundamentals be part of the 1.5 to 2 month study plan, or does that come before and the month before the exam for fine tuning your techniques? It depends on the intensity. Let me just go back up to the relevant screen. At approximately 120 hours, 6 to 8 weeks. If I remember correctly, this comes to approximately 15 hours per week. If you're capable of studying for 120 hours over this month and a half to 2 months, and if you're not way behind in math and in verbal, so like you more or less remember the basic math stuffs, if your English is more or less okay, then it should be enough. If you feel like you are just so long out of college or wherever that you don't remember the math, if you feel like your English is so weak that you really need that boost, then it won't be enough. But in general, yes, 1.5 to 2 months is for everything, including review. What do you recommend to start remembering all the math and quant, any tips? Are you asking how to remember everything, or are you asking what should I remember? If you're asking how to remember everything, then we have a video on vocabulary and memorization on mnemonics. So there's all sorts of ways, making flashcards, making sentences with the words for vocab, all that kind of stuff. If you're asking what to remember, then I really can't talk about that in a minute. We have a whole course about it. All right, I'll answer one last question, and then we have to end this webinar. And please feel free to go onto our website and just ask whatever you want there. So how does the guarantee work? If you have taken the exam before, if you have an official score report, then you send us your score report and just look at the conditions. Be careful to make sure that you fulfill all the criteria and that you know what you're getting into. But if you don't improve by at least 70 points or up to a score of 700, then you get all of the money back. So essentially, either you improve your score or the course is completely free. It's a really, really cool guarantee. All right, so thank you very much for everyone who has been here today and who has stayed with us to the end. I wish you the best of luck in your GMAT journey. Do remember that GMAT is only one small part of your life, and there is a lot more amazing stuff to do. So thank you, and hope to see you on our website.